Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into a topic that's been requested quite a bit, the Adventist Home and Christian Living series.
Yeah, it's pretty foundational stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
These books have been guiding families for generations, and we're going to see what kind of timeless advice we can unearth from the Adventist Home, child guidance, and messages to young people. Ready to unlock some wisdom on building strong, faith-centered families and raising kids with Christian values.
Absolutely. It's amazing how relevant these books still are today. Even though they were written a while ago, the principles they lay out are just as applicable to modern family life.
Right. Okay, so let's jump right in. Starting with the Adventist Home. One of the first things that stood out to me was how it emphasizes the home as this foundational building block of society. It's not just about individual families, but about how those families impact the church and even the nation. Pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, it really connects the dots between a strong family life and a strong community. The book argues that a home filled with love, peace, and God's presence creates this ripple effect that extends outward, influencing our neighborhoods, schools, and even the nation as a whole. It's pretty inspiring.
It is. Okay, so we've got this idea of a healthy home life being good for everyone, not just our immediate families. And the Adventist Home doesn't shy away from tackling some pretty big topics, like choosing a life partner, which is obviously a huge decision.
Right, and in today's world where interfaith relationships are becoming more and more common, the book's advice on marrying within the faith is particularly interesting.
Yeah, I found that part really thought-provoking,
Yeah.
especially in today's world, right? Where it's much more common to see people from different faith backgrounds coming together. So what do you think is the reasoning behind the book's stance?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the advice isn't about exclusion. It's about recognizing the potential challenges that can arise when couples have different belief systems, especially when it comes to raising children. Navigating those different values and traditions can get pretty tricky.
It makes you wonder how this advice translates to today's world, right? Do you think it's still relevant? Or do you think there are ways to navigate those challenges successfully, even in interfaith relationships?
That's a great question. I think while the book's advice is rooted in a specific theological context, the underlying principle of seeking a partner who shares your core values, that remains relevant. It's about finding someone who will walk alongside you on your faith journey and support your spiritual growth. That's key regardless of your specific religious beliefs.
I see what you mean. It's about that shared foundation, that understanding of what's important. Okay, so we've talked about choosing a life partner wisely, but what about the more practical aspects of running a household? The Adventist Home also has some surprisingly specific advice on things like hygiene and health.
What's fascinating to me is how the book connects physical well-being to spiritual well-being. It emphasizes things like cleanliness, a balanced diet, and regular exercise, not just as good habits, but as practices that contribute to a healthier mind and spirit, creating an environment where God's presence can thrive. It's all connected.
It all ties together, right? It's not just about keeping a tidy house. It's about creating a space that feels healthy and vibrant. And then it goes even further, advocating pretty strongly for country living, suggesting that families, especially those with young children, would benefit from moving away from the hustle and bustle of city life.
Yeah, it's quite the recommendation. While uprooting your life and moving to the countryside might not be feasible for everyone, I think the core message is about prioritizing simplicity and connection with nature. Finding those pockets of peace away from the constant distractions of modern life, whether it's gardening, spending time in parks, or simply finding moments of quiet in our everyday lives.
It's about creating that space for stillness and reflection, which can be hard to find in our busy world. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about child guidance. This book is all about laying that foundation for children's development, starting from infancy.
What's really interesting is how the book draws this parallel between the ideal learning environment and the Garden of Eden. Just as Adam and Eve learned directly from God's creation, child guidance encourages parents to use the natural world as a living classroom, cultivating a love for nature in their kids.
It's like bringing those Sunday school lessons into everyday life, right? Using the world around us to teach about God's love and creativity.
Yeah.
So we've got this emphasis on nature as a teacher. But child guidance also dives into the ever-important topic of self-control, teaching kids to manage their emotions and resist those impulsive urges, which can definitely be a challenge.
And it's not just about outward behavior, it's about cultivating inward purity as well. The book suggests that this inner purity is often reflected in a clean and well-ordered home environment. There's a connection between the outer and the inner.
Right, it's like that idea that a sense of order and beauty in our surroundings can positively impact our spiritual and emotional well-being. Makes you think about the messages our homes might be sending, right? Not just to our kids, but to ourselves as well. So we've got nature, self-control, purity. But what about when things don't go as planned? How does child guidance approach discipline? That's always a tricky topic for parents.
You know, what stood out to me was the emphasis on consistency and clarity, explaining the reasons behind rules, outlining consequences, and making sure those consequences are consistently enforced. It's about helping kids understand the cause and effect of their choices.
It's not about being punitive. It's about teaching them that actions have consequences and that those consequences can be natural outcomes of their choices, not just arbitrary punishments. Makes sense. One thing that really stood out to me while reading child guidance was the emphasis on protecting kids from harmful influences, particularly when it comes to reading material. I'm curious, in today's world, with the internet and social media, how do you think that advice holds up?
It's a great question and a tough one to answer. While the specific examples the book gives might feel a bit outdated, focusing on certain types of books that were popular back then, the underlying principle is more important than ever. It's about being discerning about what we allow into our minds and hearts, recognizing the powerful impact content can have on us, especially on young minds.
It's like we're the gatekeepers of their mental and spiritual diets, right? Making sure they're consuming content that nourishes and uplifts. Which brings up another question. The book talks a lot about avoiding exciting stories in fiction, but what about those of us who love to read? How do we balance enjoying stories with being mindful of their potential impact?
It's a good point. I think it comes down to being intentional about our choices. It's not about cutting out stories altogether, but about asking ourselves some key questions. Is this story uplifting? Does it align with my values? Does it draw me closer to God or pull me away? Those gut checks are important.
Right, it's that internal compass, that sense of what feels right and what doesn't. Speaking of stories, it feels like Messages to Young People is full of cautionary tales and warnings. What's your take on that approach?
It's definitely direct in how it lays out the consequences of straying from God's path, but I don't think it's meant to be scary. It's more about being honest about the challenges and offering a path towards making choices that align with our faith, and reminding young people that they have the power to make those choices, that God is there to guide and support them.
It's that perfect blend of tough love and grace that we all need, no matter what age we are. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, but there's so much more to explore. I'm ready to dig deeper into some of the specific advice these books offer on things like discipline, prayer, and developing a strong work ethic.
Yeah.
What are you most excited to unpack as we continue this deep dive?
I'm particularly interested in exploring what these books have to say about relationships, how to choose friends wisely, how to build healthy romantic relationships, and then how to navigate all the complexities that come with those connections. It's a topic that's always relevant no matter what stage of life you're in.
I agree. And I'm also curious to see what they say about finding joy in our faith. It's a reminder that following Christ isn't meant to be a burden. It's meant to be a source of deep and lasting joy.
That's a beautiful thought and something we could all use a reminder of sometimes. So much to uncover, so much to learn. Let's keep digging.
Sounds good to me.
Ah.
Okay, so last time we were talking about all these different pieces of advice from child guidance, like choosing good friends, being mindful of the content we consume, and just creating that supportive environment for spiritual growth. It's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's also interconnected, right?
Hmm.
Each piece plays a role in shaping our character and our relationship with God.
Absolutely. And speaking of shaping character, I know child guidance also talks about honesty and integrity. It's something that's emphasized throughout the book. Why do you think that's so important, especially in today's world?
Well, think about it. We live in a world where dishonesty and taking shortcuts are often rewarded, right? It can be easy to compromise our values when it seems like everyone else is doing it.
It's true. But child guidance reminds us that true success isn't about worldly achievements. It's about living a life that's aligned with God's principles, even when it's hard.
Exactly. It's about doing the right thing even when no one is watching. And that starts with us as parents. We have to model honesty and integrity in our own lives. Kids are always watching and learning from us even when we don't realize it.
That's so true. They pick up on everything. So it's not just about telling them to be honest. It's about showing them what that looks like in our everyday actions. But, living with integrity can be tough, especially when it feels like the world is pushing us in the opposite direction. How do we equip our kids to navigate those challenges?
I think child guidance offers some great advice. It talks about teaching kids that true character is built through making those tough choices, even when it's not easy. It's about helping them develop that inner strength, that moral compass that will guide them even when faced with temptation.
Right. And it's about helping them understand that true character isn't something that just happens overnight. It's something we build brick by brick through our choices and actions. It's a lifelong process, and it starts in the home.
And it's a process that we as parents are privileged to be a part of. We get to guide our children, support them, and help them develop into people of integrity who make a positive impact on the world.
You know, talking about honesty and integrity reminds me of another important theme in child guidance: the power of influence. It cautions against exposing kids to unhealthy influences that could distort their understanding of right and wrong.
Yeah, it's that idea that we need to be mindful of the messages our kids are receiving, whether it's from friends, media, or even the culture at large. We can't just assume they'll automatically know how to filter out the bad stuff.
It's about being proactive, right? Creating that safe space for them to learn and grow while also equipping them with the tools they need to discern between what's healthy and what's harmful. It's a big responsibility.
It is. But it's also an incredible privilege. We have the opportunity to shape young minds and hearts, to instill in them a love for God and a desire to live lives that honor Him. That's a pretty amazing thing when you think about it.
Absolutely. And speaking of amazing things, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about messages to young people. We've touched on it briefly, but I'm ready to dive deeper into what this book has to offer. What are some of the key themes you're excited to explore?
Well, one thing that always stands out to me is how Messages to Young People picks up where child guidance leaves off. It's like a guidebook for young adults, offering practical advice and encouragement as they navigate the challenges and opportunities of this new stage of life.
Right. It's like that bridge between childhood and adulthood where so much is changing and there are so many decisions to be made. What are some of the specific topics it addresses?
Oh, it covers a wide range of things. Everything from developing a strong work ethic to building healthy relationships, resisting temptation, and making wise choices about the future.
It sounds like it's packed with timeless wisdom that's just as relevant today as it was when it was written, which I guess is what makes these books so enduring, right? The principles they lay out are foundational, no matter what era you're living in.
I think so, that they speak to the heart of the human experience, the desire to find purpose and meaning, to connect with something bigger than ourselves, to build a life that matters.
It's about that search for truth and for a way of living that brings fulfillment and joy. And those are things that will always be relevant.
Exactly. And I think Messages to Young People does a great job of addressing those deeper longings while also providing practical guidance on how to live them out in our everyday lives. It's a book that speaks to both the head and the heart.
I love that. It's not just about following rules, it's about understanding the why behind them.
Yeah.
And it's about cultivating a heart that desires to follow God's will, not out of obligation, but out of love.
And I think that's a message that resonates with people of all ages, not just young people. We all need that reminder sometimes, that following Christ isn't about restrictions, it's about freedom. Freedom from sin, freedom from fear, freedom to live a life that's full of purpose and meaning.
That's beautifully said. And it really captures the essence of what we've been talking about throughout this deep dive. It's not just about raising kids a certain way. It's about creating a home environment, a culture, where faith and values are at the center, and where that faith is lived out with joy and authenticity, not just as a set of rules, but as a way of life.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that's what makes the Adventist Home and Christian Living series so special. It offers a vision for a life that's grounded in faith, but it also provides practical tools and guidance for making that vision a reality.
Exactly. It's not just theory. It's about putting those principles into practice in our everyday lives. So with that in mind, let's dig into Messages to Young People and see what gems of wisdom we can uncover. I'm excited to see what resonates with us, and I hope our listeners are too.
Me too. Let's keep exploring.
All right, so we've explored the Adventist home and child guidance pretty thoroughly, and now it's time to turn our attention to Messages to Young People.
Yeah, this one really feels like it picks up where child guidance leaves off, doesn't it? Like it's guiding young people as they step into adulthood and all the choices that come with that.
I totally agree. And one thing that stood out to me right away was how the book talks about making wise choices, especially when it comes to temptation. It doesn't sugarcoat it. It acknowledges that we live in a world that's full of distractions and things that try to pull us away from God.
Yeah, it's refreshingly honest, isn't it? Like it's not afraid to address the real struggles that young people face, but it also offers a way forward, a path toward making choices that align with our faith.
Exactly. And I think one of the key takeaways is that we have a choice in how we respond to those temptations. It's not about being perfect. It's about making a conscious effort to resist those things that pull us away from God.
Right. It's about recognizing those temptations, understanding their power, and then actively choosing a different path. And I think that's where the book's advice on establishing safeguards comes in, like being mindful of the company we keep, the things we read, the media we consume.
It's about creating that environment that supports our spiritual growth, rather than exposing us to unnecessary temptation. It's
Yeah.
like building up those defenses, right? Making sure our foundation is strong.
Exactly. And those defenses are important, but it's also about cultivating that inner strength, that resilience that helps us withstand those external pressures.
So it's a two-pronged approach, being mindful of what we let in and strengthening our inner resolve. And I think Messages to Young People does a great job of laying out practical steps for doing both.
It does. And one of the most important steps is choosing our companions wisely. The people we surround ourselves with have a huge impact on our lives, for better or for worse.
It's true. And the book really emphasizes that. It talks about seeking out friends who share our faith and values, who will support us on our spiritual journey and encourage us to be our best selves.
It's about finding those people who lift us up, who challenge us to grow, and who help us stay grounded in our faith when things get tough.
It's about finding your tribe, those people who get you, who understand your heart, and who want to see you thrive, both spiritually and in every other area of life. And speaking of relationships, I'm Messages to Young People also talks a lot about choosing a life partner, which is obviously a huge decision.
It is. And the book stresses the importance